This video is going to be in two parts. So first we're going to talk about the so-called other. We are conditioned to believe in the other. We're told about something called physics, and within that, everything is based on matter, which is supposedly solid, and tells us that there are lines between things, and each thing has its own separate existence. But if everything is energy, as we now know, waves coming in and out of existence moment to moment, then there are no real borders between things. And looking at this another way, we know that this mind, the mind of this one, this thing, is completely made up of concepts that have been recycled and absorbed from other human entities. If you watch the thoughts, every single one of them comes from somewhere else. And this one, the one that is being observed from this vantage point, is further contributing to the collection of thoughts that other human entities are experiencing or are displaying, being experienced. So what does that mean? If the human entity within the game is run on a continual action-reaction cycle that is perpetuated by, let's say, chemicals, thoughts produce a chemical reaction in the body, which produce thoughts, and we cycle this way. The question of whether any free will exists is there, which only pertains to the game, to the entities within the game. So what we end up having is these supposedly separate things all feeding off of each other completely unconsciously, without any sense of what another is experiencing. Within this experience, nobody else understands that. There's no other human to understand what's going on in this mind, this body. Even if they really try, that's just not how this is set up. There isn't the capacity to fully understand another thing, have a thing understand another thing. And there can be stages, we can say maybe stages of grief with this, a sense of loss, a sense of the idea of some kind of human autonomy. The human does not have autonomy. And that's fine, grieve it. It may be a necessary part of the process. When that stage is over, we let that go. What we begin to see is that consciousness is experiencing simultaneously from many different vantage points. And it's one thing to begin to understand this intellectually. It's another thing to be experiencing amongst this human amongst other humans, and to see the interplay from the standpoint of unity, to feel that, to feel the falseness of these perceived boundaries. It's not that they're not experienced, they're just not the whole thing. And then when we see past these boundaries, we can't take anything personally anymore. This person isn't me. That person isn't them. There's no human being to ultimately hold accountable for anything that's happening. In the relative, yes, as part of the game, there are consequences to actions, there are boundaries to uphold within the sort of rules of what this is. There's an idea of a society and how that needs to function to remain cohesive. But beyond that, and in an ultimate sense, so if the stand is being taken as consciousness, then there is no other with whom to maintain conflict. And when this is felt, when this is understood at the experiential level, there may still be some habitual sense of personal wrong, but it can't hold up to anything. It starts to fall apart. And then anger, the experience of anger, becomes more like that of an animal. If you see a cat, the extent of their anger is more like a momentary self-protection, and then it completely passes. They shake it off or stretch it out or whatever. With this, and I talk about this like multiple times in my book, forgiveness becomes a valid response to anything, a valid way to heal from any transgression, any wrong. A lot of people push back on this. They say it's not fair to ask a victim to forgive an aggressor. I understand that from a psychological perspective. If that's all there is, if these lines are real, these boundaries are real, and this is all there is, and this is the only way we can function, you're under no obligation to forgive anyone. But if you want to take the stand of who you are as consciousness, we have to drop all illusion of separateness, which means in the interim, a kind of forgiveness. In the end, there's the recognition then that there was no forgiveness ever necessary. And in your way of functioning, there will no longer be the need to walk yourself through this. If it's fully experientially understood on all levels. But in the meantime, we can work with forgiveness, and it becomes easier and easier, effortless even, enjoyable even, the more we understand that this is a relative exercise actually to free ourselves from the electric charge of attachment to the way things have happened in the illusory past. And it's important to include this relative self in that. We can't expect any level of success in forgiving so-called others if we can't forgive our so-called self, this relative self being experienced now out of unconditional love and acceptance. If we can't do that for this self, attempting to do it for the so-called other will always fall flat. And when we forgive this self, this constructed illusory self, again, only an intermediate step it actually becomes much easier to experience trust in the relative, trust of this relative self. It's like a healing of the breach kind of thing. And then the more that consciousness, the more we take the stand of who we are as consciousness, the more the relative experience reflects that. And so the more discernment there will be, the more wisdom, the more, we could call it self-confidence, but it's really beyond that. Awareness, consciousness, does not require self-consciousness. That's just a relative concept that a human is employing in this game of trying to overcome poor self-esteem or something. In the end, being as consciousness, embodied consciousness, doesn't require self-confidence. It's not an exercise that you have to go through. There don't need to be recoveries from being slighted, because nothing is taken personally. So we can work with forgiveness in the obvious way, but one way that I'm going to present is from native Hawaiian wisdom, and that's called Ho'oponopono. And this takes forgiveness to the next level. Instead of saying, I'm going to forgive this person, I'm going to work to forgive this person, there is an accountability for our own part in things. And let's caveat this by saying that if you have experienced narcissistic abuse, take very good care of your relative self with this work. We're not taking on any fault or blame in any situation. We're looking at cause and effect. So Ho'oponopono comes from native Hawaiian wisdom. And it's a practice kind of like mantra meditation that we can use, or a little bit like affirmation in the like outward effect that it has. So this is in 4 parts to this that we repeat. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you. And this can feel like a jolt to the system. If there's resistance to the idea of forgiveness, the idea of flipping this and asking the so-called other for forgiveness is going to feel wrong. We could say it's unfair to ask the victim of something horrendous to ask forgiveness of the aggressor in this situation. Be very soft with yourself. Don't do it if it feels wrong. There have been times when I can't practice this, and in that, or I try, let's say, in this experience there is trying, and it's totally flat. There's no love felt in that situation. And of course, we can look at that, extrapolate the wisdom we need from it, and say, okay, at this time, I can see that mind is in the way. It is attached to these dividing lines, saying there's definitely this other real person who has done real damage to who I really am. And then we can take this back to dropping beliefs. If there's still this resistance, that means the mind-body is still on board with this idea of the other. So then we can work with that. But as we, and all of this there will start to be kind of a rhythm to what can I manage today, let's say, or what can be managed in this relative experience. But when it comes down to it, and when we can start to work with this practice, what it does is it shifts perspective. So if we have a lot of anger about a situation that happened to us, happened to this relative self, which we are experiencing, we can, and a distinction here is that in this experience there is anger. It's not actually who we are that's holding that anger. So we're really dropping the illusion that's creating the anger. But when this is held, we instead, even though it's hard for me to forgive this other, I am asking the other for their forgiveness. It's not really the other. And this is really important and subtle distinction. That other is a hunk of flesh being experienced by who I am or what I am. Being experienced by the same awareness experiencing this one. Any hurting of another is a mistake, it's based in a misunderstanding. And this can bring us back to love and joy. So if you like to frame it this way, we can say we are sort of healing these pretend breaches between ourself. That's not really, you can't create conflict within consciousness or within awareness that I am. But in the relative, the experience reflects that for a time in order to bring a kind of understanding to this experience. So in this case, we can sort of extrapolate off of this. We can work through this a little more slowly before we start to repeat it, so that there is a felt sense of what these statements mean, what's behind them, when we start repeating them. So when we say, I'm sorry to the so-called other, we can say, I played my part in this. Even in an extreme situation, we can say, okay, this very difficult thing happened, or this thing was so-called unfair in the relative, but I was then not at my best. I did not respond the best. Or we can say, if we back this up more into in an ultimate sense, in the relative, there were insecurities held and maybe audiences entertained, people kept close who were not beneficial. And this was based on some misunderstanding of self-worth in the relative. So putting oneself in that situation and then expecting that other to act differently than their karma has manifested to this point, because that other is awareness in we can say it's kind of a sleep state, not aware. There's not awareness of who I am in that situation. The only thing that can really be done from love there is to completely accept that experience as it is unfolding at this moment. Doing anything other than that is to forget oneself. And so in that, we could say that that is the reason for that, asking forgiveness in that situation. But there's also, we can consider that in non-duality, if there is only one, there is consciousness simultaneously living all lives to experience all of this from different vantage points. And experiencing the illusory other hurting itself in different lifetimes. So this soul, we can call it, this package of awareness, is learning, just like all the other so-called packages of awareness, over multiple lifetimes. So we can say that in a past life, I have treated this other soul, this other package of awareness, in the same way, or done the same thing to another package of awareness. And so we can say, from that standpoint, I have had my hand in just as much of this as any other entity, projection of consciousness. And then we can work with the easier last parts, or in some cases, maybe not easier. We can say, thank you for the ability to experience life, the ability to experience interpersonal love, to experience the lack of that interpersonal love in order to come back to oneself, to the unconditional love that comes directly from who I really am. And then when we say, I love you, ultimately we are talking to ourselves, having a filtered experience of humanity. That filtered experience, all the misunderstandings wrapped up in it, are ultimately who I am. You listening right now are who or what I am. We are the same. We all love each other. We just don't know that we do. These arbitrary distinctions, these forms, seem like, they're very convincing dividing lines, but it's all from love, and it's for love. There is the experience of separation from each other, from oneself. And it's all so that that can be reconciled, so it can be remembered as an illusion. Empty space with nothing to bounce itself off of cannot experience itself, cannot experience the love that it is, that comes from it. And here we are. Here I am, experiencing myself through myriad forms and stories, all coming back to me. So when there's a really convincing story of division, we can come back to Ho'oponopono. We can say, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. And when we practice this repeatedly, it's going to have an effect, a profound effect, on the energetic layer of the body. And then the energetic layer of the body, removed of all blockage emanating from false mental projections, is then going to have an effect on the physical body. In so-called vibrating higher, in coming from a higher place, we can say, of greater understanding, of discernment, of love, of letting go of fear, letting go of division, we will then start to resonate with that in the outer experience. Others will recognize that and be attracted to that in us. And this completely transforms the landscape of the experience.